The Tale of Raikō's Retainers. Viewing the Scene at Murasakino, Part 2. Once upon a time, there were 3 retainers of Minamoto no Raikō, the governor of Setsu province, Taira no Sadamichi, Taira no Suetake, and Kintoki of the Sekshek family. These 3 warriors were all striking in appearance, highly skilled in battle, brave in spirit, and possessed sound judgment, never acting foolishly. Because of this, even in the East, they were often admired for their great deeds and feared by others. As a result, the governor of Setsu treated them with great respect, always placing them in positions of prominence. On the day after the Kamo festival, the 3 warriors conspired, saying, "Today we must go see something interesting." They discussed how it would be unsightly to ride horses in a procession through Murasakino. "We can't just walk with our faces covered either. We really want to see everything clearly. What should we do?" They lamented. One of them suggested, "Let's borrow a certain monk's cart and ride in it to see the sights." Another responded, "But if we ride in an unfamiliar cart, we might encounter some court officials who could pull us out and trample us to death for no reason." A third chimed in, "Why don't we lower the blinds and make it look like a lady's cart?" The other 2 agreed that this was a good plan, and they quickly borrowed the monk's cart. They lowered the blinds, and despite wearing simple indigo robes and hakama, the 3 warriors climbed into the cart. They put their sandals inside the cart, and without showing even their sleeves, they sat down, turning the cart into a shabby-looking woman's carriage. As they proceeded toward Murasakino, the 3, who had never ridden in a cart before, were jostled about like items rattling in a container. One of them hit his head against a plank, another bumped cheeks with his companions, and they were thrown back and forth, either falling onto their backs or tumbling forward. It was unbearable. By the time they arrived at Murasakino, they were all dizzy and disoriented, having fallen over each other countless times. Their hats had even fallen off. With the ox pulling the cart quickly, they swayed from side to side, shouting, "Slow down! Slow down!" The sound of their voices was unusual, and as they passed by, the carts ahead and the servants walking behind them heard the commotion and wondered, who could be riding in that woman's cart, making such a strange noise, like a flock of crows cawing together? Could it be some noble daughters from the East come to see the festival? But the sounds coming from the cart were clearly male voices, leaving the onlookers perplexed. When they finally arrived at Murasakino, the cart stopped abruptly. As they had traveled so quickly, they had to wait for the events to begin. By this time, the 3 warriors were thoroughly drunk from the rough ride, feeling so ill that their vision was spinning and everything appeared upside down. They were so intoxicated that they all collapsed into the cart, falling asleep with their heads at their feet. Meanwhile, as the events unfolded, the 3 warriors slept soundly, unaware of anything happening outside. When the festivities ended and the carts began to stir again, they woke up with a start. Feeling sick and frustrated at having missed the entire event, they were filled with a sense of anger and resentment. If we go back in this cart again, will we even survive? Riding a horse into a battle of 1,000 soldiers is something we're used to and not afraid of, but to entrust ourselves to a poor ox cart driver like this is useless. If we ride in this cart again, we'll surely lose our lives. Let's just wait here for a while and walk back once the road clears, they decided. After everyone had left, they climbed out of the cart and sent it back. Later, the 3 returned to the house of Governor Raikō on Ichijō Street, all wearing their shoes and pulling their hats down to cover their faces while holding their fans up to hide them as much as possible. Afterwards, Sutake recounted, "Even though we're fierce warriors, the battle with that cart was pointless. Since then, I've resolved never to go near a cart again." Thus, even though they were brave and wise men, because they had never ridden in a cart before, they suffered miserably from drunkenness, and so the foolish tale has been passed down. The tale of Sone no Yoshitada and the Emperor's Day of Ox Pilgrimage, third story. Once upon a time, after Emperor Enyu had abdicated the throne, he ventured to a place called Funatake on the Day of the Ox for a leisurely pilgrimage. He departed from Horikawa Palace, traveling west from Nijo to Omiya, and then proceeded northward. The streets were densely lined with onlookers, and there was no space for additional carts. The court nobles and courtiers who served that day were dressed in such finery that one could hardly describe it all. When the emperor arrived at the southern gate of Unrinin, he dismounted his horse and proceeded to Murasakino. There, in the northern area of Funatake, a scene was prepared amidst clusters of pine trees. A stream was directed, stones were arranged, sand was spread, and a flat pavilion covered in Chinese brocade was set up. It was adorned with curtains and boards, with handrails elegantly arranged, making the scene beyond compare. The emperor sat within, and around him, the pavilion was enclosed by matching brocade curtains. Close to the emperor, the court nobles sat, followed by the courtiers, and at the far end of the courtiers' seating area was a place for the poets. When the emperor had settled in, the nobles and courtiers sat down as instructed. The poets had been summoned earlier, and they all gathered. Upon being called to sit, they approached and took their places one by one. These poets were Nakatomi no Nosen, Minamoto no Kanamori, Kiyohara no Motosuke, Minamoto no Shigenori, and Kino Tokifumi. These five had been invited in advance by the emperor through written messages, so they came dressed in their ceremonial attire. Once everyone was seated, a short while passed when an old man wearing an eboshi hat, a hunting cloak dyed in clove, and plain trousers appeared and sat among the poets. Everyone was puzzled by his presence, and when they looked closely, they realized it was Sone no Yoshitada. The courtiers whispered to each other, "Has Sone come?" They discreetly inquired, and Yoshitada, noticing their inquiry, responded with some annoyance, "Indeed, I am here." The courtiers then asked the master of ceremonies, "Was Sone summoned?" To which the master replied, "No, he was not." Upon further questioning, nobody claimed to have summoned him. The master of ceremonies approached Yoshitada and asked, "Why are you here without being summoned?" Yoshitada answered, "I heard that the poets were to be called, so naturally I came. How could I not attend? Do you think I am inferior to the other guests here?" The master of ceremonies, realizing that Yoshitada had forced his way in without an invitation, told him, "You were not summoned, so please leave immediately." However, Yoshitada remained seated, refusing to rise. At this point, Lord Hokoin and General Kanin heard of the matter and ordered, "Seize him by the collar and throw him out." Upon this command, several young and vigorous lower-ranked courtiers rushed over, grabbed Yoshitada by the collar of his hunting cloak from beneath the curtain, and dragged him out. As he was pulled out of the pavilion, the courtiers stepped on him one by one, trampling him 7 or 8 times. Yoshitada, now on his feet, fled without knowing where to go. The young attendants and footmen of the courtiers followed him, clapping their hands and laughing. They pursued him, causing quite an uproar, like chasing a runaway horse. Many people, young and old alike, laughed uncontrollably at the sight. Yoshitada, having climbed a hill, turned back to the crowd, chasing and laughing at him. Raising his voice, he called out, "What are you laughing at? I have no shame. Listen to my words." The retired emperor came out for the day of the ox pilgrimage. I, Yoshitada, came when I heard poets were summoned. I sat with them, ate roasted chestnuts, and then I was chased out. Next, I was kicked. How is that shameful? Upon hearing this, the crowd, from the highest ranks to the lowest, erupted in even greater laughter. Thus, Yoshitada fled, and thereafter, everyone continued to laugh about the event. People would tell this story for years, and it became a topic of conversation. Thus, even among the lower class, some are particularly unfortunate. Yoshitada may have composed fine poetry, but due to his lack of awareness, he came uninvited when he heard poets were being summoned. He suffered disgrace, was laughed at by everyone, and his story was passed down through generations. The Tale of the Governor of Owari and the Festival of the Five Ceremonies, Part 4. Once upon a time, during the reign of Emperor Sak, there was a man known as Stashk of the Stashk family. For many years, despite being an experienced governor, he had not been promoted and lived in obscurity. However, after much hardship, he was finally appointed as the governor of Owari province. Overjoyed, he hurried to his new post. Upon arriving, he found that the entire province had fallen into ruin, with not a trace of agricultural cultivation to be found. The governor, being naturally honest and possessing great administrative ability, had previously governed other provinces effectively. Thus, after arriving in Owari, he immediately set about improving the state of the province. In just 2 years, thanks to his governance, the land flourished once again. Farmers from neighboring provinces flocked to Owari like clouds, transforming mountains and fields into fertile farmlands. The entire province became prosperous within a short time. When the emperor heard of this, he remarked, "I had heard that Owari was in a dreadful state, ruined by its former governors, but now, in just 2 years, it has been restored to prosperity." Courtiers and people alike praised the governor for making Owari a prosperous province once more. In the third year of his tenure, the time came for the Five Ceremonies festival. Owari was known for its abundance of silk, cotton, and other goods, so there was no shortage of resources. Furthermore, the governor, skilled in craftsmanship, meticulously prepared everything from the colors and patterns of the fabrics to the embroidery. The preparations for the festival, including the screens and furnishings, were flawless. The noblewomen's robes, the bamboo blinds, and the embroidered curtains were all exquisitely crafted. No one could find a single flaw in the arrangements, and the governor's reputation as a master of craftsmanship was firmly established. The young attendants of Owari's five ceremonies were so well trained that they even surpassed those of other regions. Courtiers and noblemen gathered near Owari's pavilion to admire the scene. Inside the pavilion, the governor, his children, and close relatives were seated behind the screens, watching everything unfold. Now, although the governor came from a respectable lineage, neither he nor his ancestors had ever been granted courtly titles or allowed to serve as officials within the imperial palace. As a result, his family had no knowledge of the customs and protocols of the court. Thus, his children, completely ignorant of courtly manners, eagerly watched the courtiers and noblewomen from behind the screens, fascinated by their movements and attire. As noblemen approached, the governor's children, in their excitement, would rush to the edge of the screens to watch. When they tried to hide behind the screens again, they often stumbled and fell over each other. Sometimes they tripped over each other's clothing or even dropped their headdresses in the confusion. Seeing this, young courtiers couldn't help but laugh at their clumsy behavior. One day, a group of young noblemen gathered at their station and began discussing the situation at Owari's pavilion. They remarked, "The governor of Owari has done a wonderful job preparing for the festival, and even the attendants are well trained. However, his family, completely unfamiliar with court customs, behave ridiculously, always rushing out to peek and then hiding in a panic when they think we might see them. Let's play a prank on them and scare them even more." One of the noblemen said, "Ses," while another added, "Let's make them believe that the courtiers are planning to sing a song mocking the governor." They decided to tell the governor's son that the noblemen were going to gather in front of their pavilion and sing a mocking song that went like this: "When the old man moves his tresses, he loses his dignity." They explained that the song referred to the governor, who, though an old man, still prided himself on his appearance despite his hair having fallen out. The noblemen intended to pretend that they would strip off their ceremonial robes, stand before the pavilion, and sing this song as a joke. The next morning, one of the noblemen approached the governor's son and, with a serious expression, shared the fabricated story. The son, terrified, reported this to his father, who became deeply upset. The governor, trembling with rage, lamented, "Why must they mock me so? Have I not served the emperor faithfully and restored this province to prosperity? Is my old age such a laughing matter that they would compose a song about my baldness?" Despite his anger, the governor feared that the nobleman's prank might indeed be real. He and his family anxiously awaited the coming day, trembling at the thought of being publicly humiliated. As the day of the festival arrived, the sound of singing and laughter began to echo from the direction of the nobleman's pavilion. "They are coming!" the governor's children cried in panic, rushing to hide behind the screens. The governor himself, though normally a man of reason, was so overcome with fear that he too hid, trembling in the small space between the walls. His family, crowded together, quivered in terror. When the noblemen finally arrived in front of the pavilion, they were indeed half-dressed, with their robes loosely hanging from their waists. However, their prank turned out to be far less severe than the governor had imagined. Instead of mocking the governor directly, they sang a light-hearted and playful song, much to the amusement of everyone around. Thus, the governor's fear had been in vain, and the nobleman's prank had caused no real harm. Thus, the story has been passed down. The Tale of Fujiwara no Tamesada and the Six Guardsmen. Once upon a time, there lived a man named Fujiwara no Tamesada. During his time as the governor of Echizen province, the issuer of the six imperial guard units had not received their allotted rice rations. As a result, the officers and even the lower-ranking officials of the six guardhouses gathered together. They took with them their flat tents and marched to Tamesada's residence. Arriving at the gate, they set up the tents and sat down in rows beneath them. None of Tamesada's household members could enter or leave as the officials sat in protest. It was during the heat of June with long, sweltering days. From early morning until around mid-afternoon, the officials endured the scorching sun, their bodies baking in the heat. Despite their suffering, they remained resolute, thinking, "We cannot leave without our rations." So they stayed, determined to see the matter through. Eventually, the gate opened just a crack, and a long-serving retainer stuck his head out and addressed them, saying, "The lord of the manor, Governor Tamesada, has a message. I truly wish to meet with you quickly, but due to the seriousness of the situation and the severity of your protest, the children and women in the household are in great fear, and I cannot come out to discuss the matter with you. However, seeing how terribly you have suffered in this intense heat for such a long time, I am sure your throats must be parched. I have been thinking that, although it may not be much, I could at least serve you some drink. Afterward, we can discuss the issue in detail. If you would like, those of the closer ranks, such as the officials from the left and right Imperial Guards, should enter first. As for the officials from the other guard units, they can come in later after the closer officials have been attended to. Although I would like to invite you all in at once, there is simply not enough space to accommodate everyone. So please be patient and let the closer officials enter first." The guardsmen, parched from the heat, were relieved at this offer. "At last, we can speak of our concerns," they thought with joy, and responded, "We are most grateful for your gracious offer. We will enter quickly and explain the reason for our protest." The retainer relayed their words and saying, "Very well," opened the gate. The officials of the left and right Imperial Guards and their attendants all entered. In the northern corridor near the inner gate, long mats were laid out from west to east, about 3 ken, approximately 18 feet in length. On these mats, 20 or 30 trays were arranged. When the officials sat down and looked at the food laid before them, they saw plates of salty dried sea bream, sliced and served. There were also salty slices of dried salmon. Salted horse mackerel as well as sea bream preserved in soy sauce were also served. For dessert, large plates were piled with about 10 purple plums, which appeared to be quite ripe and filled with juice. After they had seated themselves, the officials were told, "Now let the officials of the left and right Imperial Guards come forward." The first to be called were Toro no Kanetoki from Owari and Atsuyuki from Shimotsuke. They entered, accompanied by several other senior officials. Once these senior officials had gathered, the gate was closed and locked behind them. The officials sat in a line at the inner gate, and the voice from within called out, "Please come up quickly." At this command, they climbed up and took their seats to the east and west according to their ranks. Soon after, they were urged, "Quickly, bring the drink." However, the drinks were slow to arrive. Meanwhile, parched from the heat, the officials eagerly grabbed their chopsticks and began eating the salty dishes, dried sea bream, salted salmon, and the like. But the drink still had not arrived. They complained, "The drinks are late," but they continued to eat the salty food, unable to resist. Eventually, a large drinking vessel appeared, and two young servants brought it out, setting it before Kanetoki and Atsuyuki. Next, a large jug of sake was brought in and set before them. Kanetoki and Atsuyuki each filled their cups to the brim, and despite the slightly sour taste of the sake, they drank deeply, their throats dry from the heat. They drank 3 full cups without stopping, and the other attendants followed suit, drinking 2, 3, or even 4 cups each to quench their thirst. As they drank, they used the plums as a side dish. Despite the sourness of the sake, they eagerly drank cup after cup. After four or five rounds, Governor Tamesada finally appeared from behind a curtain addressing them. Far be it from me to refuse you out of miserliness or to disgrace myself by causing you such trouble. Last year, Echizen suffered a terrible drought and we could harvest almost nothing. The little we did gather was taken by the government for urgent matters, leaving nothing behind. Even the food stores in my own house have run out, and my servants and children are starving. So it is not out of neglect, but rather due to dire circumstances that you are suffering this shame along with me. Truly, this is a result of my own unfortunate karma. With these words, he wept bitterly, showing no shame in crying before them. Hearing this, Kanatoki and Atsuyuki responded, "Your words are indeed reasonable. We all understand the situation. It is not just your fault, but the current state of affairs has also caused the guards to be in such hardship, which is why we have come today. This is a misfortune for all involved." However, as Kanatoki and Atsuyuki were seated, their stomachs began to rumble loudly from the salty food. They tried to distract themselves by tapping on the table with their ivory tablets, but soon they could no longer control it. The governor noticed that even the officials seated further down were all suffering from the same affliction, their stomachs growling loudly. Kanatoki suddenly stood up, exclaiming, "I must excuse myself for a moment." He rushed out, followed by the other officials, who, unable to contain themselves, ran out in succession. Some headed toward the latrines without even taking off their clothes, while others crouched in the open, unable to hold it any longer. Seeing them in such a state, the other officials from the four guard units burst into laughter, saying, "Just as we thought, this old man had something up his sleeve. We knew something strange was going to happen. Governor Tamesada is no fool. It's all because we greedily drank that wine." And so they laughed, even while suffering from stomach aches and diarrhea. When the gate was opened again, they were told, "Please exit now. We will let in the officials from the other guard units." The officials, still sick and holding their stomachs, joked, "Let them in. Let them suffer the same fate as we did." And so one after another they staggered out, sick and in pain, while the officials from the other guard units, having seen what happened, fled the scene, laughing as they escaped. In this way, Fujiwara no Tamesada, known for his wit and cunning, had plotted this trick. He had thought to himself, "If I bake them in the heat under their tents for 3 or 4 hours, then invite them in when they are parched and hungry, feed them nothing but salty food, and then give them sour, spoiled sake mixed with crushed morning glory seeds, surely they will all fall ill with diarrhea." Thus, Fujiwara no Tamesada, known for his refined sense of humor and clever schemes, had successfully outwitted the officials. The people of the time laughed at the officials who had been tricked and said they went to the wrong man and suffered for it. After that incident, the six guard units never again protested to officials who failed to provide them with rations. Thus, the story has been passed down. The Tale of Motosuke, composing a poem while crossing Ichijō Avenue during the Kamo Festival, Part 6. Once upon a time, there was a renowned poet named Kino Motosuke. He had become assistant director of the imperial storehouses, and while serving as an envoy for the Kamo festival, he was crossing Ichijō Avenue. As he passed by where many young court nobles' carriages were lined up to watch the festivities, the decorated horse Motosuke was riding suddenly stumbled. Motosuke fell headfirst from the horse. Seeing an elderly man fall from his horse, the young nobles watching the scene exclaimed, "How unfortunate!" However, Motosuke quickly got back on his feet. His hat had fallen off, exposing his hair completely, making him look like a man wearing a broken earthenware pot. As his attendants scrambled to retrieve the hat, Motosuke, without bothering to put the hat back on, scratched his head and said, "Oh dear, what a commotion. Please wait for a moment. I have something to say to the young nobleman." With that, he walked toward the nobles' carriages. The sun was setting, and his bald head shimmered in the evening light, creating an incredibly embarrassing spectacle. The people on the avenue, who had gathered like a market, watched and laughed while running about in confusion. The people in the carriages and stands all leaned forward and laughed. In the midst of this, Motosuke approached the nobles' carriages and said, "You may think that my falling from my horse and losing my hat was a foolish thing to do. However, you should not think that way. The reason is that a man of wisdom might stumble over something and fall. It is a common occurrence, let alone a horse, which is not an animal known for its intelligence. Moreover, this road is full of very high stones, and when a horse's bridle is pulled too tight, it cannot walk in the direction it wants to. It stumbles this way and that. Therefore, one should not blame the horse for the fall. If the horse stumbles over a stone and falls, what could I possibly have done? The saddle is smooth and does not hold anything in place. The horse stumbled badly, so I fell. That, too, is not a disgrace. As for the hat falling off, it is not something tied down with string. It was merely secured by tucking it into my hair, and when my hair slipped out of place, it came off. Therefore, there is no reason to be upset about a hat falling off. It's not unprecedented either. Lord Szek lost his hat during the Great Thanksgiving Festival purification rites. Also, Szek, the middle counselor, lost his hat during the imperial outing to the fields that same year. Lord Szek, the captain, lost his hat at the Kamo festival on the day of the return procession in Murasakino. There are countless such examples. Therefore, young noblemen unfamiliar with such matters should not laugh at this. It would be those who laugh at this who are truly foolish. Saying this, he went from one carriage to the next, counting off the examples on his fingers and explaining them. Having said his piece, Motosuke moved away from the carriages, stood in the middle of the avenue, and called out in a loud voice, "Bring my hat here." His attendants then brought the hat to him, and he put it back on with great composure. Seeing this, everyone who had gathered around laughed and clamored even more. Later, one of the attendants who had tried to retrieve the hat for him said, "You fell from your horse, and instead of just getting your hat back, you made such a lengthy speech about pointless things." To this, Motosuke replied, "Do not speak nonsense. By explaining everything logically, the young noblemen will no longer laugh at such things in the future. If I hadn't done that, they would have continued to laugh foolishly forever." This Motosuke was a man who took pleasure in making others laugh by saying amusing things. Um, it is said that his speech on this occasion, too, was spoken without a trace of embarrassment. Thus, the story has been passed down.